also looking at including tools to verify, manage, and everything else, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. So about the actual project itself. We're open and community driven. We're not looking to sell Linux. Of course, we're looking to sell support, but at the moment, we're not looking to sell Linux or anything like that. We're trying to use the community as much as possible. We have external mailing lists, those kinds of things, looking for as much input as possible as to what would it take to actually get this thing up and running, how many people can get involved, and actually define tools and those kinds of things. Trying to make sure that we're talking to the community and we're listening as well. And then, so we're basically building it on top of the standard Linux distribution. If you look at what the difference between an actual, just a standard Linux box running an OS and everything, what's the difference between that and an HPC cluster? There's only like a handful of tools that layer on top of the base OS that make an entire cluster. So if we can focus in on what those tools are, make those modular enough, the base OS doesn't matter after a while. So, you could go CentOS, you could go Red Hat, you could go Ubuntu if you really want to. And so and the hope is that we can. So what we're trying to do is, figure out what those pieces are that make the HPC system an HPC system. And then another piece that we're really focusing on is this verification suite. How do you know that your HPC system is actually running, or up to snuff, basically? Is all the hardware working? Are all the packages working? Is the compiler actually going to work with our stack? And that's what this suite is actually it's aiming towards. And also, so, let's see. Yeah, that's good. About the team. So we have about 7 people. It's slowly growing a little bit. Basically, I took all the names out because we don't want anybody stealing our people. So here's the broad overview of the people that are on the team. We've got a lot of Sun architecture and software knowledge. Some people have been embedded doing very large-scale systems and all the Sun hardware. We have a couple of people that were specifically on the Lustre team. They came over, so they've got that knowledge, kernel knowledge, system integration. Then we have we have some access to some technical writers and communicators. We are working on the IB specialist. Let's see how that goes. And then we also have a set of interns that are specifically, right now we're focusing on them for working with our verification suite and trying to get that testing going. And yeah, we're distributed a pretty good distance, which is fun for conference calls. So the history of our group, or the history of the project, it was announced at SCO7, and that's kind of the first mention of it. January, we were all put together as quickly as possible, met for the first time in January. We officially launched mid-February. Most of us weren't really on board until the second week of February. So we've been moving as quickly as possible. We're right now working on the beta release. It's an internal beta release, trying to keep as much wraps on it as we can so that we don't have too many people pulling us in too many directions. But actually I'm working on it right now, and they're upset at me because I haven't finished the DVD yet. And then, so we're also on track for our first release. That'll be at International Supercomputing in June. Here's kind of a pretty graph showing our roadmap. Basically, and the first thing that we did was we called it Alpha. It was basically looking at what happened at TAC. What base did they have? What packages were used? We started really identifying what was there. And then we started taking that and using that knowledge, sort of writing internal docs, trying to figure out between ourselves what we were going to do. There were a few other projects that were going on that we had some input on, that just kind of getting our names out there. Right now we're working on the beta, and it's a CentOS 5.1 base right now. Reason we chose CentOS was licensing. If we can kind of get behind the open source version, we can start pushing forward. We could hopefully open some doors for some choices. Oh, I can use that as a pointer. And so right now we're just determining what's going to be in version 1.0 and doing a lot of testing. We've been doing a huge amount of testing in just the past few days, looking at some of our tools. So 1.0 in June at ISC, the idea is that it'll work out of the box and it'll be great, and like trumpets will sound and we'll just be champions and stuff. Or it'll take some work, but we'll do our best. And it'll also have the verification suite, as much of it as we can. And then next release, we haven't really determined our versioning numbers yet, so that's just a big next release. That's going to be about 6 months time frame between these releases. Basically, just focusing on what new features do we have to put in that we missed in 1.0. More about the stack. So the base distro choice was it was really based on community input. Some needs that were talked about right now was kind of what drove us to CentOS. Now the question is, it's like, well, can we stick with CentOS 5.1? Who's going to support it and that kind of stuff? If you need total view support, good luck with CentOS 5.1. And that's really where having the modular base distro and being able to wipe that out and put in whatever the end user needs. And so that's where that goes. Verification suite. Yeah, so this is where a lot of the work is going on, because the problem is we don't want to include licensed software into our stack. If I hand you an ISO, I want you to be able to run your cluster and not have to go and talk to Etnis and not have to go and talk to Intel or whoever else to get all of your licenses running to get your system. But we want to make sure that those things still run in the end. And so the verification suite basically really helps us get that part done. Behind the scenes, we'll be testing stuff. We'll load up our own cluster, use our own software, load these third-party software on there, make sure that everything works as best as possible. We're not NPI geniuses, but we'll do our best to try out the various compilers and stuff and debuggers and whatnot. And so that's really where a lot of our work is, just to make sure that everything's going to work together. And then, so the product, I hate that word, but the deliverable is going to be an ISO, or at some point we'll make fancy little DVDs and jewel cases, and somebody will draw a giraffe on it just for fun. And so basically, that's what we're aiming for, is to have an ISO that freely available. You download it, it has all the tools and documentation needed to basically get your cluster up and running. And that's so. That didn't quite come out as well. It looks really pretty right here. It'll also look better on when people actually download the slides and they can see them. This is just the boot screen from the DVD. I worked really hard on this, so I'm going to make it up there. It's pretty. It's just a standard DVD. So, all right. Here's the happy layer slide. Basically, all this is just showing just what we're trying to do. Like, you got the bare hardware. I say hardware because I sell Sun hardware, but whatever. You can put whatever hardware you want down under there, and just build your own cluster. You throw the Linux distro on top of that. Right now we're in InfiniBand focus, so OFED within the Linux distro. On top of that, you've got your file systems, Lustre, because we're at LUG, and I'm in the Lustre team. So basically the parallel file system there. On top of that, you start doing management type stuff. So we're focusing on OneSys, which is out of Sandia, basically because it's a provisioner / installer that can do diskless and diskful, all within the same package, and really gives you a good one large package to basically manage the entire cluster. Conman, PowerMan out of Livermore, because those are the best tools ever for console and power. Resource scheduler, I leave that as a generic resource scheduler because there are so many options right now that it depends on which site you're at, who's going to be using Slurm or Moab or anything. So we can't really well define this. That's where the verification suite comes in and says that, well, our stuff will still work with it. On top of that, the MPI layers, we're looking at OpenMPI and Babbage, and Babbage too, if you want to throw that in there too. So that's just the MPI layer. And then a lot of this is just things that could be layered on top. I mean, right now we're RPM based. It's just simple packages. You can install whatever you want to on top of it. Our hope is to make sure these will work. And then this little thing just to make everybody feel good that we're trying to do all of it. So here's an eye chart that it makes a cool little wave. So again, when you can download the slides. Basically, this is just showing sort of a lot of the packages that we're focusing on and sort of where they're at. So the light blue, I guess that looks light blue, is the beta, what we're focusing on for beta. And then 1.0 is the rest of this dark purple, which includes the stuff from beta and whatnot. And we met as a group and kind of made some handy little categories for things that we were trying to fill in, like the first one here is provisioning and schedulers and stuff. And so these are all the options that we're looking at there. This is by far not a complete list, and we're always still adding to it, much to the annoyance of people that keep trying to download this from us. So, like, it's just what hardware are we focused on. There's a lot of Sun hardware in there because we're Sun. I think I mentioned that. And then, ILOM, the integrated lights out management stuff. So people can look at that later and yell at me about what's not included. A thing to note is some of these are underlined. Let's see, the underlined means that it's actually an option. So it's not included in the stack. It's verified to work with the stack. Things that are bold, let's see. Yes. So yes, things that are bold and italicized are also not included and require licenses. Again, so those things are just they're gonna be verified. We know that they'll work with our stack, but we aren't gonna be supplying them. Here's kind of a, wow, colors are really different. So here's a nice little overview bubble circle diagram of how we're kind of approaching support. So Giraffe is us. And what we're doing is basically signing up to try to cover the base system itself, and then using, so you got this for the verification suite to make sure that all these things are going to be tested. Right now, these are the only tests that we have. We're trying to build a pretty good framework so that you can keep adding to that, but right now that's all we have. And then you have the third-party stuff. All the licenses, I mean, I myself really don't want to stand in and try to do total view debugging, so which is a weird thing to think of. But so all of those third-party licenses, you can go to the third party and actually work on those. And then a lot of community. We're going to try to disseminate as much into the community as possible, feedback as much as we can, and try to figure out how to solve bugs and make sure they stay dead. So. All right, so this list kind of grows and shrinks and stuff, but these are the main communication paths that we have at the moment. We do have an external emailing list. You can go to the standard Lustre site just like you would sign up for all the other Lustre mailing lists, and now you can join our software stack mailing list. It's pretty low flow right now because we're all afraid of being the first one to mention something NDA on it, and like the gods of Sun come down and hurt us. But at some point, one of us will finally start emailing on that and start using it a little bit more. There's also a blog, which has one entry on it, dated like 2 days ago when I decided to actually write something. And so basically, these are going to be our main portals externally right now. The blog will just kind of list any of the like any cool stuff that we happen to find along the way, and announce kind of our releases and those things. And the list is really to get the community together to let people know what's going on, what choices we're making, and then everybody can kind of yell at us as much as possible. And then there's my email. And I'm done. Anybody got questions?
So how do you differentiate this with rocks?
So differentiating this from rocks. So I get that a lot. Like, why aren't I just using rocks? I'll put my personal biases aside of hating rocks with a personal passion. But oh, did I let that slip? So the thing about rocks, it serves a purpose. I mean, it's a nice all-in-one. You throw it in, it comes up, it runs. But modifying rocks is very hard, especially modifying it to not be Red Hat based is extremely hard. And that's how they've made their life simpler, is to really focus on one thing and do that as well as possible. And what we're trying to do is actually open that up and give people options and really get the community going on this. So that's kind of the difference right there.
Well, the verification is another part.
Yeah, and we are focusing on the verification suite and those kinds of stuff. So.